You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome to TFM's local books and comics show for Star Trek. I am so excited to be here, and this is going to be a very special episode, a very different episode than many of our episodes here. We are gonna forego any news because we just have an incredible interview, and we're going to be talking to James Swallow, and so I'm so excited to have him here. Before we dive into that, of course, make sure you're following us everywhere, all over social media. Of course, Trek FM on Twitter. We've got Instagram you could follow. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Of course, you can find the podcast here wherever you're getting your podcasts. So make sure you're subscribed, and that way you get the shows as soon as they drop. Of course, you'll also want to make sure, if you get a chance, hit us up with a star rating review over on Apple Podcasts. You can also find us over at the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference on Facebook. And if you'd like to talk to listeners from all over the world, you can join there and, talk about what's going on here at Literary Treks or any of the other shows. And do want to just say a quick thank you to our associate producers here through Patreon. We've got Casey Pettit and Greg Rosier. Really appreciate both of these gentlemen supporting the network through Patreon. Now, if you like what we do here on Trek FM, please go to patreon.com/Trek FM and see how you can be part of our team. But with all of that preamble, I think it's time just to jump into our interview here with James as we talk about the ashes of tomorrow. James, welcome back to Literary Treks. And how I gotta ask, before we get to anything else, how are you feeling?
Well, certainly happy to be here, Matt. Thank you once again for inviting me. It's always a pleasure. As for in a larger scope of things, it's complicated, right? We're kind of on the edge of the end here with the Coda series. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I'm really happy with the way the books are being accepted right now, getting a lot of really great positive feedback from people. But it's kind of leavened with a bit of sadness as well that we are into this running down the curtain now. But I think I'm hoping that people will feel the same way I do, which is kind of, I'm sad that it's ending, but I'm happy that I've taken the journey. Yeah,
no, I can totally understand that. I mean, for you and Dayton and David, and of course everybody else who's been involved in this project of, the Litverse, I can't imagine what it's like to kind of see it finally, kind of come to a close so we can open up a new door and what, they'll be able to do with the books. But, this has just been such a massive project. And like the authors, I mean, I know fans have been invested in this for so many years, almost, I guess it's over 20 years now.
Pretty much.
This is a thing. I think there is that immense sadness and joy and all those things mixed together, which I think more than anything, that's kind of one of the things that I found, moving into this book, was just how much it really hit me. So you definitely got me in the feels many, many times. And part of that was tying in DS9. And, the Litverse with DS9, the characters have kind of been all over the place at this point. Of the franchises, I think Deep Space Nine was the one to which, because of the end of the series and then the way that things ended up with the way it was written, we didn't get a lot of like Deep Space Nine characters spending a lot of time with each other, even when in the books. And so first I just wanted to ask, and this was a question that good friend Ryan had, and I thought it was great, was, did you guys, and especially you, writing this book, did you consult with David R. George III to kind of get an idea of where all the characters have been? And had there been any idea of like having him maybe write any of the lead-in books if that had been approved?
Well, there was originally an idea of a fourth book. I don't know if you might have heard Dayton Ward talking about this, what we call the Breadcrumbs book, which would have been the idea of, it would have been a standalone novel that would have been a kind of stealth entry into the Coda series. So the concept of it is that you would read the book and you'd think it was a regular standalone book. And then towards the end, events would start to happen and you realize, oh, actually, this is a prequel to the Coda trilogy. And scheduling issues meant that we couldn't do that. So it ended up being the 3-book series that you see now, which is Dayton's Moments of Sunder, Mine Ashes of Tomorrow, and Dave Mack's upcoming Oblivion's Gate. We did talk about having other writers on board. Una McCormack's name was definitely in the mix as well. I know that David's was as well. But in the end, just the vagaries of the production schedule meant that we couldn't connect as well as we would have liked with those other writers. So we took what had already been written and we took the kind of the outline that we had for the story, and we said, well, as much as we would like to continue to explore a lot of those kind of hanging threads, the issue we had was like, how many of these threads do we tie up in these books and what do we leave untied? And we really wanted to try and to tie up as much as we possibly could. And it's difficult, even though we've got kind of over 300,000 words of novels to tie up all this stuff, we couldn't possibly dot every I and cross every T. So we wanted to try our best to tick all of those boxes, but it wasn't always possible. So, I would have liked to have connected more with what David intended, but in the end, we were kind of, pushed for time, and we had to kind of take it in the direction that we did. That's not to, I hope nobody would think that's disrespecting the work that David's done at all. I mean, I tried my best to pay homage to the stuff that he did, because one of the things with this series, the whole idea of it is that we were kind of reaching back to sort of salute everybody who's come before us, and David certainly did a lot of work to create and build out the current version, the current iteration of the Deep Space Nine characters, and I tried to stay as true to that as I could.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody would take what you said as any way disrespectful. I think, it does come down to, and that's the difficulty in anything in life is being able to, make things work time-wise, and obviously this is a whole series about time and not having enough of it sometimes. And so I think that makes complete sense, that the struggle in the series is also the struggle sometimes with the authors and trying to fit things together for everyone, and it doesn't always work, and that's just part of life. So I think that's completely understandable. Obviously tying in here with Deep Space Nine and having it be, and those characters have a much bigger presence here in this story. I just love to hear you talk about working with, Sisko and bringing him back, and of course, giving him that connection with the prophets again, working again with Kira. Specifically, I was thinking of those two and just how, they had really moved in different directions, and then bringing them back together. I would love to hear you talk about that.
Well, this is although this isn't my first, technically it's not my first Deep Space Nine story. My first prose full-length novel for the Star Trek fiction line was the Terra novel. Mm-hmm. But this is actually the first time I kind of got my hands on the core cast of DS9. So it's my first time writing, a meaty role for Benjamin Sisko, for Kira Nerys, for Quark, for Odo, for Ro, for all of the other characters, all the other DS9 characters. So that was an exciting thing for me to do. The novel opens with an inside viewpoint of from Benjamin Sisko. We're in Ben Sisko's head as he's sort of like rushing to answer a distress call on board a ship. And so for me to get into that character's boots, that was a great challenge, because I've never really had the opportunity to write him before. And the thing the thing about Sisko is his heart, right? That's always the thing I've always felt about you. That character is the strongest thing. He has this really strong heart to him. And I wanted to kind of connect to that. And I think Kira has the same aspect. I think it's one of the reasons why the two characters in the show kind of connect so well, is that they at their core, they're very similar people. Despite the fact they come from completely different upbringings and the life experiences they've had are totally different, there's that one thread that runs through both of them that is very, very much the same person. So I looked at them as kind of like certainly in the early stages of the book, they're kind of the two pole stars for the narrative. And the connecting thread between the two of them is this connection they have with the aliens in the wormhole, with the prophets. And it's Sisko's connection to the prophets. You know, he has this vision in the opening chapter of the book, which is of this terrible apocalypse that's occurring, and he realizes it's a terrible warning. Something really bad is going to happen. And the prophets are reaching out to him and saying, you know, you have to get involved in this. And Kira has a similar experience. You know, this is a different version of Kira, who now is, you know, she's essentially a monk, you know, in this monastery. She's going through this, you know, this whole kind of, she's gone through this change in her outlook into the world, and she's gone through this religious sort of experience. She has having the same vision, but she's seeing it from a different point of view, and she's experiencing it in a different way. And so the two of them are being drawn together, even though they, at this stage, the early stage of the book, they don't even know it. And so for me, it was interesting to play with that duality, of the similarity and the duality of those characters, to have them sort of come together. And they are they're the sort of the motivating forces in like the first third of the book. So I greatly enjoyed writing those characters.
Yeah, I thought, and it was something really special to see. And I think, you know, I think back to, you know, Deep Space Nine and obviously just the struggles that, you know, Kira had for so long to kind of accept Benjamin Sisko into her life, you know, because he's the emissary, but at the same time, he's somebody who becomes a friend, you know, and by the end of the series, you know, it's a beautiful thing, because it's her and Jake standing there waiting for him to return, and how much he's meant to them in their lives, and how much she's completely changed, you know, as a character, in the sense that she's been able to let go of so much of her anger and all of those things because of her relationship with him, and the way that, like, the prophets have moved in her life, you know, and I think it makes it really incredible. So I loved that, like you said. I really responded to kind of seeing that, you know, he's the emissary, she's the hand of the prophets, and that I really liked the way that you brought that together, and, you know, allowed, I think, something that David had done, you know, all the way back in the day of making Kira the hand of the prophets and making that mean something in the end was really nice, because, of course, tons of spoilers, but, you know, Kira making the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, there, you know, and that's so true to her character, because she would obviously make the sacrifice not only for Bajor, but honestly for the rest of the universe anytime, because that's just who she is, as is Sisko. And so just bringing those two together, it was really nice to get to see them play with each other again. And it was one of those things, because as I'm reading the book, I'm just lamenting, and obviously it's a huge lament because all of it's ending, but I'm lamenting that we're not going to see these characters again, because I absolutely just loved seeing them back on screen. And it was difficult, because that's what I've wanted for a long time in the novels, to have more of the Deep Space Nine crew back, and you did it here, but then it's ripped away again, and it was just like, well, just take my heart and stomp on it. Thanks, James.
Well, that's the note that we hit again and again through this series is bittersweet.
Yeah.
Is that, you know, we see these characters that we love and we care for, and we feel kind of, you know, happy to have them, but it's sad as well because this is the ending of that story, and this is those characters passing on into it, like, you know, into history, as it were, into myth and legend, right? That's what's going on with these characters. And, you know, certainly you touched on there about the thing about the hand of the prophets that, you know, that David came up with is that was a really interesting idea. And it was one thing that, to be clear of with all of Coda, is although there's 3 different books and you see 3 different authors' names on those books, if you look in the front page of that, you'll see underneath the title of every book, it says Star Trek Coda by Dayton Ward, James Swell, and David Mack. And it's important for me to be clear about this, is that the story as a whole is a creation of all three of us. It's not, we didn't just go to our corners and do our three stories. We broke that entire narrative. And, originally it was going to be me who was going to write the first book, and a scheduling issue meant that we ended up changing it around. So there is a shared responsibility between all three of us across that trilogy of books. And, when we decided that the second book was going to have this focus on the DS9 characters, Dave Mack was the one who said, we have to pay off the hand of the prophets. That because that's such a powerful moment, a powerful thing in Kira's character. We have to pay that off. And, we're getting into full spoiler territory here. When, at the end of the story, when the destruction of DS9-2 happens, once we kind of had that idea, it's like, well, it has to be Kira who pushes the button.
Right.
She has to be the one, the choice has to be made by her. And, arguably you can say, well, but Sisko's kind of the head man in the room. He's the boss. Shouldn't it have been him? But it felt like, no, it feels like a truthful payoff to all of Kira's character development, that she should be the one to make this kind of monumental decision. Because after all, Sisko is the emissary, and an emissary is a bearer of news, a bearer of information, right? But the hand of the prophets, literally the hand, the hand that moves, the action that pushes forward. Kira is exemplifying the will of the prophets in that moment. So we felt like that payoff had to be in her hands at the end of the story. And I think it plays out really well, because she goes through this powerful sort of tragic choice. But at the end of the day, only she could do it, because she's the only character who would fit in that space and make it feel truthful and honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think you rightly keyed into, the fact that she is legitimately enacting the will of the prophets at that point. Her and Sisko have been both told what needs to happen, and like her being their hand is the one to make that come to fruition in real space and time. She is their avatar, to go all the way back to the original lit verse. That's who she is. And so I think that makes absolute sense. And I love that. And I think one of the things I really liked, in the book too, was obviously there's some questions about whether or not this is our Bashir or not, I guess, because it seems a little bit like he is he from the mirror universe, maybe? Who knows? Or is he a combination of those? I don't know. But
I can answer that question if you want.
Yes, please do. Yes, I would love to know the answer.
Okay, well, the definitive answer is that, yes, he is our Bashir.
Okay.
He's not the mirror Bashir.
Thank God. Because this is the moment that first got me the most, was him being told that Ezri had died. And I lost it, because Ezri is one of my favorite characters. And the Dax characters in general, I love them. I really enjoyed the relationship between her and Bashir. I was always happy that they had gotten together in the end of Deep Space Nine, and then of course the books tore them apart and they went their separate ways. But his reaction to her death, and the fact that that was the moment that kind of sparks him back, it seemed perfect to me. It didn't seem too easy. It just, if there was anything that was going to, knock him out of his, subconscious, basically, it would be the death of Ezri. And I mean, again, it killed me, inside to have to deal with that. And I loved having him back, but also, I love that you guys didn't bring back the Bashir we knew. You brought back the Bashir who's been through hell, literally.
Yeah, I've got to be honest with you, that scene, I wish I could have done more with that. Time constraints meant that we couldn't have, I would have loved to have kind of lingered a little bit longer in that scene and done a little bit more with it, but the time constraints we had meant, there's a lot of moving parts in this story, and and we didn't perhaps have as much opportunity to kind of stop and linger on that moment. That scene, and again, I have to give credit to Dave Mack, because in the original outline, Dave was the one who said, this is this is how we bring him back. This is the moment. And it was one of those kind of lightning bolt. It's like, oh, that's perfect. Is that it's this terrible tragedy is the thing that shocks him out of this state of kind of catatonia where he's been just sort of mentally adrift. And he's, Garrick's looking after him, but it's this sort of situation where he's never going to change. And, the idea that Bashir is just going to get old and grey sitting there staring out the window for the rest of his life. And then this terrible tragedy happens and it shocks him back into some semblance of the man he was. But this is the broken Bashir, right? This is the guy who's gone through hell in the Section 31 stories, who's, really just been deconstructed and put back together. He's definitely not the same man that we think he is. And, he's not quite right. And, and you'll see a little bit more of that develop, through Oblivion's Gate. Dave kind of explores that in greater detail. He's walking wounded in this story, but he also has a very important role to play. And it's Ezri's death that motivates him and gives him kind of the energy to get back out into the world. And then how that expresses itself, you'll see that play out in Oblivion's Gate.
And I love that idea because, when you think about, in many ways, like Bashir almost reminds me of the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Star Trek in the sense that he's lost everybody he loves, and especially by the end of this story, everybody that he's loved is gone. They're dead or they're not around anymore, I think Garrick is probably the only one he has in his life that isn't dead, it seems like, because obviously Miles makes the ultimate sacrifice here as well to make sure that, that Kira is able to do what she needs to do. And so, just when you think about everything that he's given, and seen taken away from him, and at the same time, the entire universe and the multiverse that he is aware of may also be extinct soon. The weight that he carries, it reminds me much of Obi-Wan Kenobi, of the weight that he carries. Everyone he's loved has died or been taken away from him or turned evil. It's how do you still have hope when that happens? And Bashir is like you said, walking wounded, and by the end of the book, you kind of realize, just in some ways, like you said, he says fairly, there about the other universe. It's a little bit scary,
and that's exactly what we want you to, the whole point of that moment at the end where he kind of comes out of the shadows with this slightly kind of demonic glint in his eye. We want people to go, I think it's Picard says, "Oh, Dr. Bashir, I presume." Mm-hmm. But the kind of subtext is there, yeah, but not the one you think.
Yes.
And he's not it's not literally like he's a different version of Julian Bashir, as in from a parallel reality. He's our Julian, mm-hmm. but he's changed. Mm. And that's part of what we've done with the Litverse all along, is we changed and evolved these characters. And Julian is, like all of these characters in the books, approaching the end of his arc. But the man he is now, as I said, is way different from the guy that we first met, back in episode 1 of DS9.
Well, and on top of that, like I kind of mentioned, Miles, makes the ultimate sacrifice here, which, funny enough, somebody had made a joke about. I'm so surprised that Miles just wasn't left as the last person in the universe, because that just seems to be his lot in life. I was reading that, I think, on Trek BBS, but it also does seem perfect that Miles, his last act is to engineer the S out of something, because that's who he is, and he's, even talk about the idea, you had him in there about, whether or not he would become an officer. And he's like, no, I'm fine being a non-com still, and that's just who O'Brien is. He is the blue collar hero. And he is, in many ways, the Atlas of DS9. He's always been holding it up, and I think that's what I think that actually is something of the name of the episode when we talked about him on the Orb years ago, Chris and I. But I just this seemed like the perfect end for him, that he wouldn't even think about what was required. He would just do it, because that's who Miles is as a character. He's
not a guy who seeks glory. He's not looking for promotion. he just does what he does, and he does it really well. And in that scene at the end, it's like, you said the phrase you said he engineered a solution. That's what he is. He's an engineer. He has an engineer's mindset. And in this circumstance, when everything is coming apart around them, Miles looks at that problem and goes, how do I fix this? Because that's his approach. That's always his approach. How do I fix this problem? And even if it is an insurmountable, unfixable problem, he's still going to damn well try to fix it to the best of his ability. And that's him through and through. He wouldn't consider what lies beyond that. It's like, here's the problem right in front of me. I've got to fix it. And if it means I have to make a sacrifice, that's what he does, because he's a man of duty. And, and his honor comes through that duty. I don't think he's somebody he's not looking for medals or plaudits, right? There's that, the whole joke in the Lower Decks joke about the statue of O'Brien, right? Being a hero. I mean, I wanted to give him a scene that's worthy of him having a statue made of him. And I felt like, I even toyed with the idea of putting that in as a line of dialogue. And I thought it was maybe a little too, have him say like, oh, well, if something bad happens to me, make a statue of me, right? And I thought maybe that's a little bit too on the nose, because we've got plenty of meta jokes, plenty of gags in the little nods and stuff. And I didn't want to go kind of too far down the road. But I wanted him to have a scene that would be worthy of song and legend after the fact, right? Is this he's an ordinary guy, and he just gets on with the job, and that, to me, that's the ethos of that character through and through.
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful, and obviously if we were going to see Deep Space Nine kind of meet its noble end, this is kind of the way I wanted it to happen, with all of these characters working together. And you take Ro and Quark are gone, some of the biggest deaths that we've seen, and then Nog making the ultimate sacrifice on, wink wink, that California class starship, which was wonderful. But I just, one of the things that really struck me with, especially like Quark and Ro making these sacrifices, was the way in which, again, you took characters who had such a development and brought them to an end that felt like it fit with the journey that they've been on. That they would go from places where, Ro is an angry, a person who's willing to give her life for nothing, because she just has so much anger and she doesn't know what to do with it. Quark, would he give his life for anyone other than his latinum? And then Nog, the journey from, to be the first Ferengi in Starfleet. And so, I
mean, it's like the point you make there about, like, Ro kind of starts off almost in a kind of nihilistic viewpoint, and she's one of my favorite characters on Trek, I have to say, and then we see her grow through the novels into this command role, and I think she becomes the officer that Picard always saw in her, in TNG. It's like she makes right the faith he had in her in that episode, and I love the fact that she grows into that character. And the relationship with Quark is fun because it's just these two opposites. It's the two of them finding each other. You wouldn't think that they would ever have a connection, but they do, and that's really fun. And Quark is the one who changes the least, because Quark never changes, because Quark is always Quark. But he's still grown and changed, but there's still part of him that remains perfectly the same, and that was fun to write, just to put him in that situation and have him do something selfless, but kind of still complain about it because that's who he is. And that's and that's the fun moment. And I think what their final scene together, because it's a shared moment of the two of them. If I'd done that separately, it wouldn't have had the same impact. But the fact it's the two characters sharing this moment of kind of standing up against this wall of terror coming towards them, that I think sort of says a lot about who they are and who they've grown into.
Yeah, and it kind of gives them like sorry to interrupt, but it just reminds me of they have this like great Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid type of end to them, which is fantastic for those two characters.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an element of that in there as well. Is even to the very end, they're kind of still bantering with each other because that's who they are, and so even if they're facing off against certain deaths, they're not going to lose that. And that was fun to write, that sort of, again, that sort of bittersweet moment. And then moving on to what you were saying about Nog, the thing I've always loved about his character is the kind of, there's an inherent nobility in him that it's always, if you go back and look at the early iterations of the character, you can kind of see it struggling to get past his Ferenginess, to get that kind of noble streak out. And him joining Starfleet is the thing that allows that to kind of blossom. And, his arc throughout the Ashes of Tomorrow is me trying to touch on that, is saying, putting him in a situation, he becomes a captain in the course of the story. He has to take command of a ship and he has to make hard choices. He has to do the toughest job that any Starfleet officer would ever do. And he absolutely rises to the challenge because that was always in him. And to me, it felt like I had to show that, to say that, he could be this true kind of, too honorable, upstanding captain. And so it was really great for me to be able to write that moment. And it's also a kind of, hand on heart, say it's a salute to Aaron Eisenberg as well, for, a great actor who we sadly lost. It's, me kind of paying respect to him as much as paying respect to the character.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. And I was thinking about that too as I was reading that, and just, it's a wonderful conclusion to that story for that character. When you think of him coming to Sisko's office and desiring to get into Starfleet and seeing the progression of him. And I think, the beauty of that and the beauty of Deep Space Nine in general was just that Star Trek had kind of done the mono-alien for so many years, where everybody that's in an alien species is basically the same. And Deep Space Nine completely broke that apart and said, no, every part of every species is unique. And just because they happen to be Ferengi doesn't mean that they're going to be this. And, or Klingon means this, everybody is unique, and therefore they can go on their own journey. And Nog's journey was a very special journey, and I think, it was a beautiful one at the same time. And, you mentioned something that I really liked. You talked about the way that Picard had believed in Ro and the officer that she could always be. And in many ways, Dayton had really set this up, and I think this also continues in this book because, I was thinking of it as Picard's next generation. And Picard has been a character to which he has influenced so many of the next generation of Starfleet. And I love the way that we saw that here with his relationship with Bowers. And I thought it was wonderfully done, the way that you had Picard supporting this character who is going through the roughest time, just lost a friend, just lost their captain, now is thrust like Nog into that position, having to make the hardest choices of his career because he's basically throwing his career away to follow Picard. And yet Picard is deferential to him on his own starship. He's being his number one, being it tactical, doing whatever's like the humility of Picard here. I thought was really beautiful in the way that he was showing, I would say, servant leadership. What it means to truly be a captain is not to just be the person up front all the time, but to be a servant leader. And I really appreciated that continuation of that arc for Picard because, to me, what it shows is that the legitimacy of what you guys did in the books to have him get married, to have a family, how that's made him a better man, a better captain, and a better leader, I think has been phenomenal. And it continued, beautifully from the first book to the second book here with his, helping Bowers.
Picard doesn't have anything to prove, right? Right. He doesn't need to, after everything he's said and done, all the experiences he's had, Jean-Luc Picard doesn't need to walk onto the bridge of the Aventine and go, well, I'm a superior officer. I've got more experience. I'm in charge, Mr. Bowers. He doesn't need that to happen because he doesn't have to prove anything. And everybody on that ship knows who he is. You've got to imagine that those younger officers, they probably read his logs in Starfleet Academy, right? Bowers certainly has, right? Bowers has probably gone to lectures that Picard has given, right? And so they all know who he is. And Picard doesn't have to be that guy because he understands what like you say, the kind of the idea of you don't have to be in charge to lead, that supporting somebody is just as equally valid as being the guy at the front. And that's what he's doing. the situation that Sam Bowers finds himself in, that he loses his captain and his friend, and he's, and he's not expecting it, the rug's pulled out from underneath him. Picard's gone through all of that himself. So he knows exactly where that guy's head is at. And also, he knows exactly what he needs at that point in the story. So that's why Picard is filling that role, because he's probably on some level, he's thinking, when I was in this situation, I didn't have this. So I'm going to give Bowers what I didn't have, which is a strong right arm. Somebody who can say, well, I'm right here for you. Here's the benefit of my will and experience. He's mentoring him, which is exactly what Sam needs at that point. And Bowers kind of steps into the role, and it becomes a moment where instead of him looking at Picard as, he still honestly respects him as a veteran and superior officer, but there's a moment of kind of parity where he treats him like a peer, like, we're on the same level here. We're both captains of ships. We're both in the same position. And I think that's a strong, and it shows that Picard is the kind of guy who doesn't need, like I say, he doesn't have anything to prove. He doesn't need to be the top dog. He just needs to get the job done. And he helps Bowers find his way towards doing that.
Yeah, no, I just, as you were talking, I love that idea of like you said, Picard doesn't have to prove anything to anyone. And, and I was thinking back, the situation that, Picard was in with the Stargazer and all those kind of things, and like being thrust into a terrible position. And like you said, maybe not having what he's able to give Bowers. And at the same time, treat him as an equal. That, yeah, we are on the same level now, and you're having to make the decisions for you and your crew that I'm having to make. And, and right now it's careers be damned, because this is too important. And I really love that. And I also loved the way in which, you gave that great moment to Picard and Sisko, that they've come so far, and there's that moment of like, I really wish we had had more time together. And it just broke my heart, because like I would have loved to have spent more time with Sisko and Picard together. And we'll get a little chance of that, I think, here, in the third book, hopefully. But those are such different types of captains, and yet have, such I just want more. Like, this is the problem with these books, James. I just want more, and we won't get more.
Well, that's, it's like they always say, when you leave the stage, always leave them wanting more, right? So I'd much rather go out with you saying, you want more, than rather than saying, oh, this was enough, Yeah. The thing about the different command styles, right, is I think that Bowers is kind of like still figuring out how to be a captain. And he's like, he's figuring it out on the fly throughout the course of this novel. And but the model that he's following is Ezra Dax, right? Because that's the captain that he's been loyal to. And so he's commanding in the same style that Ezra commanded in, which is that personable, friendly style. But he's carrying all of the same wounds his crew are carrying, because Ezra was well loved by her crew. And in return, she picked the best people for their jobs. Picard's got his style of command. Sisko had his style of command, which I think in the stories of him being captain of the Robinson, I think David kind of tried to put like a kind of distance between Picard and his between Sisko and his bridge crew, which to me that never really rang true to me, because I didn't feel like that was the kind of guy that Sisko was. So I tried to kind of change I figured enough time has passed. Yes. So that I tried to bring more of a kind of closer connection between, although we only see them briefly at the beginning of the book, with Sisko and his bridge crew. And then again, I think Nog's command style is very much influenced by Sisko, because that's the guy who was like his first captain, right? The first guy who he was, ever kind of subordinate to. So I like the idea of those officers kind of imprinting their command style on the people who follow behind them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, that is kind of the beauty of this whole idea of Star Trek family, right? And that the impact that we have, what we leave behind, which is obviously, the the end of Deep Space Nine. What we leave behind, and Picard even talks about that, in Generations, like, how we lived is so important, and that's what matters, because that's what determines what we leave behind is the choices that we've made. And so I think the beauty of this series is watching those thematic elements that have been playing out throughout all of these characters' existence to the end, and that makes is really nice. And speaking of that, I was thinking about the artificial intelligence angle here that you had with Data and Law, and I was really interested to see that Data is basically living the lockdown life, living vicariously through sensors, and that in many ways, Data, even though he's merged with a human form, he's actually become less human, not more human. And it was kind of interesting because Data is so intelligent, so smart, so based in facts and figures. But the one thing that I realized that Data lacks is he has no ability for the human inclination towards faith. And I was really struck by that because Lal does. And I loved that.
That's definitely, showing the kind of the position that Data is in, like where his head's at, right? That's me taking from the Cold Equations trilogy that they made, the position of where Data was there. And I feel like he's kind of grown. If you look at the Android Data, the original Android Data, he's pre-human. He's a machine that's trying to be human, and then he kind of becomes human. But this Data is post-human, and there is a kind of I don't want to say coldness, but that's kind of really the only way I can think to sort of, there's an aloofness to him. It's that sort of Dr. Manhattan kind of thing, where
nice.
He's grown beyond us, and he's still connected, and he still cares for his friends, and he still has love for them and all of that. But he's grown beyond us. And I think the Data I was trying to portray in this story is somebody who is aware of that fact. Who, if the cosmic threat of this story hadn't happened, he's a guy who's thinking, well, I'm going to live maybe another million years, and possibly, because technically he's immortal as long as he doesn't kind of trip over and fall into a fusion reactor or something, right? If he keeps himself trim, if he replaces his body, Data could be functionally immortal. And that means he outlives everybody he's ever going to know, and he'll make other friends and he'll outlive them. And how does that change your perception of life, right? So the only person who's remotely close to the level he's on is Lal. Lal's still going through that. She's at the beginning of that arc. He's much further along it than she is. So she has more of a human connection. And I always felt like the tragedy of the episode, The Offspring, when we see her, is that Lal is branching off in a different direction that is much more human, that she's evolving in a very different way. And I wanted to kind of call back to that with, these are these version 2.0s of Lal and Data in this story. But I wanted to call back to their kind of earlier incarnations and say, make it clear that they're evolving in different directions, but they're still true to the original direction that the characters were taking. And that's why Data is in this. He's the kind of the genius closed off in his castle, experimenting with things and looking at the world through a telescope. And he's in danger of becoming too isolated. And that is the central kind of argument, is Lal is the one saying we need to go out and get our hands dirty with this issue that's happening. And Data's saying, it's already too late. He's almost got this fatalistic kind of mindset. And so having the two of them sort of express those 2 points of view, kind of helps set the framework for this part of the story.
Yeah, there's a beauty in that too, because it reminds me of something that Sisko says to Jake, and he's like, it's life, Jake. You'll miss it if you don't look up every once in a while, and that's Data is missing life. He life cannot be lived through screens. It's like Data is basically living the Twitter life as if that's a real place. Like that's not real, Data. Like, looking through telescopes and sensors is not the same as experiencing it for yourself. And again, I love the way you kind of bring him to like that Dr. Manhattan place, because I think that makes so much sense for the character. And I'm fascinated, obviously, to see, where he'll kind of end up by the time Dave Mack is done. I'm sure it'd be dead, but, because it's Dave. But, and now he gets to kill everybody. But
I mean, I think Data's arc is kind of goes from being a reluctant participant in humanity to a kind of full participant, and then he kind of trends back out. And where we find him at the beginning of the story is he's become an observer, and that's essentially he's an observer of life. And coming back in this episode, in this book, he becomes a participant again. And you'll see, as you say, that fully expressed in Oblivion's Gate.
Well, and I did really enjoy, because as we're talking about the idea of Data. I really appreciated how Data basically this whole story. It really reminded me of what Soren says about the fire in which we burn, and that's time. And they're definitely in the frying pan right now. And so, Data, though, really kind of, he mimics Gandalf and McCoy, when he says to Picard, that what we have always strived to do, Captain, defy the odds and go on and face the impossible, and as McCoy would say, turn death into a fighting chance to live. And I think I love this turn for Data because, it's a beautiful reminder, for all of us that no matter how bleak, we can't lose hope, and we have to keep fighting for what's right, regardless of the cost. And even when it feels like everything is burning around us, staying true to those principles. And, I think Data is shown by Picard and Bowers and Sisko and all of these other people in this story that, and even his daughter Lal, that if you lose that, you'll lose everything. And you might as well just give up, and so, and that there are those things that are worth, putting your life on the line completely for.
Absolutely. That I think in a way that moment actually is kind of Data channeling me a little bit, because I've said this before that when we first started talking about doing this trilogy, I was against the idea, and I kind of had a strong reaction against it. I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want the game to end, to quote Picard there. And I felt like I didn't want to be involved in it. But it was Dave Mack who brought me around. Dave was, it was 4th of July. We got together and we had a discussion about this, and he kind of pitched the idea to me, and he won me over on it. And Data's conversation with Picard, when Picard says to him, "We need your help," and then the conversation at the end, that's me and Dave talking. That's me as Data saying, "I don't want to do this," and Dave as Picard saying, "You need to be part of this." And then at the end of the story, that's me saying, "You were right all along," and it's, so that's kind of like, I'm putting a little bit of my own kind of experiences into those characters there.
Well, I think it really does remind me of, I feel like in my own life, the past 5 or 10 years, the world in general, it has been this place to where you could just kind of throw up your hands and say, "I'm done." Whatever, I'm done. And this, I think, in the face of insurmountable odds, that we would still say, no, we're going to keep going. The John Wayne quote of, courage is being scared to death and saddling it up anyway. And that's exactly what, they do. They saddle up and they lock and load, to quote Data from Insurrection, and they go, and they keep going, because if we give up the fight, then we have nothing left. And I really appreciated that. I think, this story, I think, is timely in that way.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that the whole kind of, do not go quietly into the night, rage against the dying of the light. There's definitely a kind of sense of that. I mean, one of the touchstones that I think we tried to pick themes that, that resonate, like Star Trek always does this with the mythology of Star Trek. It's always, if you scratch the surface, it's talking about deeper issues. And definitely the issues that are at play in these books, as we're talking about, aging and the idea of accepting death, of loss, and how you process those things. All of these, these basic human elements that everybody experiences in their life at some point, all of those are kind of bubbling away under the surface. And Star Trek always kind of tackles real world issues, in a funhouse mirror. I always say about how, you get this warped reflection of reality that we tell in this sci-fi background, and you can use it to explore your own feelings about stuff that's happening in the real world. And I certainly feel that some of the story we're doing is like a metaphor for issues like climate change, where people are talking about, here's a existential threat that is huge, that many people find it difficult to kind of get a handle on. How do you as an individual affect something like that affects the entire world? And this is, the cosmic threat in these books, you can see is a kind of metaphor for that as well. It's our characters are dealing with this huge threat, and they're not sure how to handle it with just the question of individual action. So, all of those things I was trying to touch on to ground it in a sense of reality, as well as telling an exciting Star Trek story, doing what Trek always does best, which is, it connects to the experience that we live as regular human people.
Yeah, I mean, this is, it was really interesting, obviously, because, the Federation says, no to helping. They're going to deal with the immediate crisis, and yet not deal with the existential crisis or the true root of the problem. And, I think in any way, shape, or form for us as human beings, it's definitely easiest to deal with what's right in front of us, or not even deal with that at all. Just stick our heads in the sand and pretend like it's not happening. And so I think, that is an excellent reminder of, and I think, to me, that's an indication too of that we're so focused inward that we're not actually looking at what's happening outward, which is what Data was doing, right? He's a representation of that. But the Federation here is also a representation of that, because they've been through so much, and they're so like, and in many ways, it's almost this selfishness of like, oh no, we're just going to take care of ourselves. We're just going to look inward. We're just going to like make ourselves okay, And I feel like, that's a perfect representation of just the world in general. Like, we're so focused on just ourselves. And it reminds me of, Interstellar. We used to look at the stars, but now we're just here digging around in the dirt, and we've lost perspective, and I think that idea of perspective here is really, really important. And I really appreciate that, because I think in many ways that's the only way we're going to get back to where we need to be, is if we find a different perspective other than just ourselves.
I mean, it's the big picture, small picture thinking. It's hard to think big picture. Especially you take where all of us right now, grasping towards hopefully the end of COVID and lockdown and all this situation that we've been in for the last couple of years, and everybody feels like they've been beaten up. Let's be honest about it. And that's kind of the situation that the Federation is in. There's this litany of stuff that's happened to them over the last few years in the Litverse. And then Picard turns up and goes, oh, guess what? I've got another problem to add to the pile. And you can sympathize with it in a way. When the president of the Federation says, haven't we got enough on our plates already? We've got so much to deal with. This is one thing too many. So you can understand why maybe they're saying, let's just deal with what's in front of us, because we've got so much to deal with. We don't need another problem. And what Picard says is, you don't have that luxury, because this is something that is not going to go away. And as hard as it is, he's like, yes, absolutely, respecting the fact that you've taken a lot of hits recently, but this is something you need to deal with right now. And that's where the argument comes. His insistence that they pay attention to this threat and their insistence that they pay attention to something else, that's what creates the tension in the kind of the middle act of the story.
Yep. I love that, and I think it's one of the places, like you said, it's where Star Trek really shines, and it can shine a light in ways to help us kind of see ourselves better, and that was one of the things I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this idea of shadows, because with Worf and Riker dealing with being haunted by shadows, but being haunted really by the ever-presence of many versions of themselves and kind of losing it. Where did that idea come from? And was that just your way of kind of representing how fear drives us to do things? Or I was really interested in that.
Well, yeah, there's definitely some of that in there. But I just like the idea of kind of, being haunted by your own ghost. This is the idea of what they're seeing is the ghosts, effectively, of parallel versions of themselves from universes that have been consumed, or universes that are crumbling. The acts of the bad guys, the Davidians, where they're destroying these branching universes. The barriers between realities are becoming permeable, and this stuff is starting to bleed over. And people who are susceptible to it, so in this case, it's Worf and Riker are the ones who get it in the neck in this story, is they're experiencing shadows of themselves, these phantom versions of who they were, alternate reality versions who are dead and gone, who are dying or in the process of being destroyed, and that their experiences are bleeding over. And I think there's something, the ghost stories are like, uniquely scary because it helps us confront a lot of issues about like death and life and the idea of loss. But the science fiction twist on saying, well, what if it's not just a ghost, it's your ghost, and you are literally staring into the face of your own death and destruction and a parallel version of a life that you never led. Those ideas, I think, are fascinating and kind of uniquely chilling. And that's part of what I was hoping for this, to sort of show the scope of the threat. We wanted the threat of the Davidians and what they're doing to be something that really is kind of terrifying in that kind of way that makes your stomach flood with ice, makes your blood run cold. It's not just a bad guy with a gun. It's an existential cosmic threat, and we wanted to make it feel that, have that sort of degree of truth to it. And the ghosting, I think, really kind of plays well into that whole metaphor.
Well, I loved that, it made so much sense because Worf has had that experience with multiple versions of reality. And right. With Riker, did it come from the idea of his being split in the transporter, and that's what would make him more susceptible to, this happening to him specifically? Or is it more the fact that he obviously has a different version of himself in the Picard universe as we know it now because of the television show?
I think it's like, we kind of, I felt it would be clear to the reader that, that there's multiple iterations of Riker because we've seen them. And Data had also played with that in Headlong Flight, where we saw an iteration of him there, and he wanted to call back to that. And we had this scenario that we wanted to do where we wanted to put Riker and Picard on opposite sides of the argument, because that's something that we haven't really seen before. The idea of putting a character in a strongly adversarial situation. And we wanted to essentially give Riker an excuse to go full Badmiral. And it's, well, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to, because everybody's going through the ringer in the story. And Riker's particular kind of journey through this is that he's being exposed to this alternate version of himself, and it's taking him to these darker places. And so that's the journey that we wanted to take him on. And so the idea of it expressing itself through these sort of quantum reality ghosts just kind of dovetailed perfectly with the direction we wanted to take him in.
Well, and in many ways, I think the beauty of that too is that it shows how fear can drive us, right, to do terrible things, and do things that we never thought that we would do, which is Riker being on the opposite side of Picard in an issue, and part of that is because it is this, it really is almost this irrational fear of things that haven't happened to this Riker, but it's the your mind just running wild with possibility. And obviously, when you have the multiverse and you have multiple possibilities for characters, and having that affect him specifically here, I think it really works. And it'll be interesting to see what happens to him in the end, because will he make a turn? Will he come back? Will he, because, Worf is able to have Spock help him through this in the story, whereas, Riker doesn't. The only person who could probably get through to him would be Troy, really. And so will she be able to make that, connection with him? It'll be fascinating to see. So, and I do have to say, just with the Shadows thing, I really appreciate, I know some people knocked Dayton for not allowing Worf to have his moment with the death of Ezri, and I really appreciated that, because these stories are connected. You can't, I don't think, really judge any one of you until the story is completed, because it is a full, 3-part story, in much the way that, you wouldn't judge the whole Enterprise Augments arc with episode 1. You got to wait till it's, the full arc is done, because it's really one story. And so I really appreciated the fact that he had that moment, and especially him calling Alexander, and, because he's so rattled. And Worf, in many ways, like Bashir, has lost everybody he's ever loved. Like, everyone he's loved has died. Like, he's like a bad penny. You don't want to be with Worf, so. And I really appreciated you kind of also allowing us to have some kind of connection and closure with Worf and Alexander because of that as well. Giving us that relationship with them to kind of fully come full circle. Like, they're in a much different, much better place. And to see that emotion from both of them as well was fantastic. So I really appreciated giving Worf that moment. Yeah,
I think I agree with your point there. It's unfair to say, like, Dayton didn't play off that bit with Worf, because that wasn't his job. It was mine. And like I said, this entire storyline is the creation of me, Dave, and Dayton. So the payoff of Worf's emotional beat in my story is as much written by Dayton as it is written by me, as it is written by Dave. This is a creation of the three of us. Just because you see different names on the books, it doesn't mean that each book is wholly, singularly the creation of a single writer. This is a collaborative effort through and through. So, Dayton has had a hard job with moments, because he had to build the kind of the base upon which I kind of like, he builds the base, I expand it out, and then Dave brings everything kind of across the finish line. So each of us have a different, a key, different, difficult task to prove it. And Dayton had to lay out the kind of table for all of this. So, his book is obviously going to have a different tonality to mine, and Dave's book is going to have a different tonality again, because we're performing all these different roles. We wanted to make sure that all of the emotional beats are going to be in there in the story as much as we can possibly manage it. And that did mean breaking them up, Mm-hmm. So that's why Worf's moment, his kind of moment of grief about Ezri, we see that reflected, because he never really externalizes it, because he's the stoic Klingon guy, he's not going to be walking the corridors wailing and weeping. That's just not who he is. But we see it through Alexander's eyes, because Alexander is, because he's his son and he's perceptive and he understands how his father's mind works, he has that moment where, not only does he realize how much this affects Worf, because he's not, he's lost Kayla, he's lost, Jasminda Chowdhury, who was another character that, that Worf was romantically involved with. And then he's lost, and he loses Jadzia. And then when Ezri dies, it's like he's lost Jadzia all over again, because Ezri's death is also the death of the Dax symbiote. So it means that the very last traces of Jadzia are gone from the universe.
Yes.
Is that now Jadzia only exists in the memories of the people who knew and loved her. So for Worf, it's like she dies all over again, and it's hard for him to take. But because he's a stoic guy, he's going to put all that inside. He's going to channel all of that inwards. But because Alexander is a much more human character, Alexander immediately kind of reaches for that and he finds it. There's the moment where Worf is talking about the threat that's going on, and Alexander realizes that he's keeping something from him, and he realizes his line is something like, he's seen something terrible, and his first action is to keep it from me, to protect me. And that's like what Worf is always doing. He's like, he internalizes a lot of stuff, not always for the better, because he feels like he has to be a warrior, protector character. And that to me felt like that's true to his character, that he would internalize a lot of how he feels about the loss of Ezri and by extension Jadzia.
Yeah, I just really appreciated, the way that you guys are doing to the best of your ability in the space that you have to give these characters their moments. And, I think that obviously that's so evident in the way that's being taken care of. And I really appreciated that. And I loved this moment because, and one of the, harkening back to our beginning of the conversation, talking about Deep Space Nine, what we get here is something really beautiful in the sense that there's prophecy fulfilled. And, the struggle and the tension of faith and science and all of those type of things that Deep Space Nine dealt with so wonderfully, I thought it felt like you guys did, and you specifically dealt with that really well here, and about, how the prophecy of the prophets is fulfilled, and in a way that nobody really would have pictured, but it actually is. And we have the tears of the prophets, but we also have the end of the tears of the prophets, because the orbs are dead now. Maybe not. Who knows? I would be okay if they're not, because there was and I remember in the Picard trailer for season 2, there is some allusions to Bajoran artifacts in that. So maybe there's something to that. I don't know. But what I loved about this is that the prophets themselves are willing to do the right thing regardless of the cost. In the face of, universal Armageddon, in the face of universal opposition, they're willing to, and they have the courage to do what is necessary. And I thought that, of all the godlike characters that we've seen in Star Trek, these are the most godlike, in the sense that they're willing to make the sacrifice for their people, right? There's a lot of Christian illusion in there, which I really appreciated, but they're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice so that the people that they care about and the universe as a whole could live. I love that. I thought that was really beautiful.
I mean, the prophets are not they're not vengeful and angry gods. I mean, although some Bajoran prophecy kind of like points towards the darker end of the spectrum. To me, the sense of the prophets as deities to the Bajoran people was always that they were educators and teachers and shepherds guiding them. And to me, it seems like a logical progression that that would be, if they have that kind of parent figure role, a parent eventually passes, parent eventually sacrifices themselves for their children. That seems to me to be like a logical progression for the characters. And of course, we've got to remember that the prophets are atemporal creatures, right? They exist out of time. Time doesn't pass for them. So they already knew this was going to happen because they live all moments simultaneously. They, from the very start, this was always, for them, was always destined. So they knew it was going to happen. And, if you look at it through the lens of that idea and how that affects Sisko as the emissary and Kira as the hand of the prophets, it puts a kind of very different spin on things, to consider that the prophets were always going to be sort of part of the resolution of this problem, at least, in the events of the second book.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it worked really, really well. And, I think it was one of those moments, too, that in the story where it just really hit me, especially as a Deep Space Nine fan, to just see, this end of these characters in that way. And, something that's been so important to the series overall. And I think something really beautiful in the fact of allowing Star Trek to have a really honest conversation about like faith and science and and all of those type of things in a way that Star Trek had never had before. And it was just really beautiful. And so obviously one of the big things is wrapping up those dangling threads. And one that has been noticed, obviously, here from the Typhon Pack books is the Andorian cloning crisis. You at least mention it here, which was fantastic. So just love to hear you, as somebody who's been so immersed in writing the Litverse for so long at this point, on that point and any others that you felt like you just were really pleased of getting a chance to kind of put some kind of closure to.
Well, early on when we were talking about this, we kind of made a list and said, like, look, what's all the major dangling threads that people are going to want to see resolved, and how many of these can we do without cramming too much stuff in? And also, I wanted to, as much as possible, nod somewhere if we can do it in every book, every iteration, every incarnation of Litverse stories. If there's some way we can just name check characters or ships or places, even if it's just a line of dialogue, just so we can say, we see you, we respect what you did, we salute the story that you wrote, just to try and sign off on all those things. So, it's like, we mentioned the USS Prometheus from the Prometheus novels. We'll talk about, can we get a mention of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers and the USS Da Vinci? I wrote in a scene with the Klingon, touching on Keith Candido's Klingon Empire novels with those characters. Is showing here's them doing their thing, to as much as we possibly could to try and cross connect to everything that's come before. The only thing we kind of kept at arm's length was the Voyager stories, and that was specifically because Kirsten Beyer asked us to do that. Because if you've been reading the Voyager narrative, you know that those books come to a conclusion with the Voyager crew and the fleet kind of going off out into extragalactic space to have their own adventures. And what we didn't want to do was undo all of that and say, oh, we're going to bring them all back to the Alpha Quadrant to deal with this problem, because it would feel like it was a kind of betrayal of everything that Kirsten had done with those characters. So, you won't see many of the Voyager characters in this series. We have got a few Voyager characters who turn up throughout the novel, but the Voyager crew have gone off and done their own thing, and they're out there in space. So that was, that idea of respecting the choices that have been made by other authors. We tried to do that as much as we possibly could and still keep the series coherent. And part of that was, just little nods and winks as well. So the Andorian cloning crisis, which I think is, I can't remember the title of the book it's in.
It's in Seize the Fire, because we actually just covered that on Literary Treks.
And, if the Litverse had kept on going, I got to be honest with you, I had a pitch for a Titan novel, and I wanted to tie that up. I wanted to go back and say, oh, well, here's what happened with that. And, fate means we're not going in that direction. But I thought, damn it, if I can just get a reference in there. So there is a line of dialogue where someone references a cloning scandal taking place on Andor. And that is, again, me just saying, we didn't forget about that. We do pay respect to it.
Okay, so I have to ask, what was your solution then? Obviously, it'll never happen, but what was your thought process for that Titan novel?
Well, I wanted to bring back the duplicate characters, and kind of play some of the notes that they did in Second Chances, the Riker duplicate episode, where you think that some of the characters are going to get killed off and replaced, and then not take the easy out, and give those characters their own life and the opportunity to kind of go off and have their own sort of existence. I really like the idea of having some, how the Andorians have got like the multiple genders, and they have like a kind of marriages with like, I can't remember, is it like 4 people in an Andorian marriage, or is it 5?
4. Yeah.
I like the idea of, I don't think it would work because of the genders of the characters, but I like the idea of one of the marriages being 4 of the same person. And I thought that would be just an interesting kind of idea to play with, but no, we never got to explore that. It was kind of I didn't have the idea fully formed, but I would have liked to have explored the possibilities with that. But it's a missed opportunity, sadly.
Yeah, no, I think that's really fun. The way that you did all that. I mean, you mentioned the fact that we have a couple of characters here that you did get to play with from Voyager, Tom and B'Elanna, because they did come home, that they didn't want to transverse the universe to another universe. They felt like they wanted to raise their kids on Earth, and so I loved getting to play. Tom is my favorite character in Enterprise, and so getting to have him here and getting to have his mischievousness play off as beneficial, to Picard and the rest of the crew there was fantastic. He was the perfect person to play that joke. And I also just really liked the little joke that you made about him and Wesley. Like, have we met before? Like,
it's just that's been staring me in the face for years. I just said, why has nobody ever just touched that and said, like, gone on the nose and gone, why? You look like this guy.
It's great.
I mean, it's not the first time we've had characters in Star Trek played by the same actor, right? It's like, I'm trying to remember the two characters, like Dr. Anne Mulhall meeting, Catherine Pulaski, and them both, because they're both Diana Muldaur. And there was the other character that Diana Muldaur played in the original series, having those three women meeting each other going, oh, you look familiar. I like the character of Nick Lacano in TNG. And then, of course, we have Tom Paris turn up. And I always thought it would be fun to just sort of tick that box, to have those characters have that sort of conversation. So it's just a little meta gag, me kind of indulging myself there.
Well,
because I figured this might be the last chance I get to do it.
And why not? Absolutely, why not at this point? So,
I mean, I've got to be honest. There's a bunch of meta jokes in there as well. There's a few, and it's not going to be a Jim Swallow Star Trek novel unless I put a couple of obscure references in there to stuff. There's even a reference in there to a very obscure 60s, a German 60s night sci-fi series that was kind of regarded as the German equivalent of Star Trek, Space Patrol. If you know that show, there's a little reference in there to that, which is something I always wanted to do because it's kind of in the same sort of wheelhouse stuff. And I did have a German fan message me going,
"Is this great.
A reference to this?" Oh, yes, it is. Well done for spotting it.
That's awesome.
So there's a few gags in there. There are some very obscure nerd references. So anybody out there, feel free to pick your way through the book, see if you can find them all. There's no prize or anything, but it's it's always fun to look.
That really is fantastic, though, and I think it's one of the places where if you guys can't have a little bit of fun with this, when else would you be able to? And I think it's completely and thankfully, there is a little bit of levity there. You totally want that, and so. And I think that's really important in a series like this. You do want there to be a little bit of levity or a little bit of fun in it, as difficult as the books are and as heart-wrenching as they are. So I just really think it's fantastic in that way. So, well, James, I think I wanted to give you the opportunity, as we come to the close of the Litverse in. Say anything you wanted. Like, this is just your free time to, like, what has all this meant to you? Where are you and what are you hoping for, for the future now that, this part of your writing career in Star Trek is coming to an end?
One of the things we talked about when we were having the early discussions about what we were going to write, is I said that we should sign off each of these books, and we've each written an afterword in each of the books. I think Dayton had never done one before, but he really felt like it was important to do one for this, and I've done the same thing, and so has Dave. And we've written. I think if you want an explanation, if you want an answer to that question in full, read that in the back of the book, because that kind of, I think that's we talk about how our influences on these novels, but we also talk about what Star Trek has meant to us. To me, it's like I said at the top of the show, I'm sad that we're at the end of this, but I'm so happy I've been able to take the journey. And all of this comes from a place of love, even though we've done some bleak and terrible things in these novels, let's be quite honest. these are stories about carrying light through the darkness, and being able to write that, being someone who's been gifted with the opportunity to tell those stories, has been a fantastic part of my career. And it is daunting and exciting to be kind of where we are. We are, like you say, we are turning the page here. And I was discussing this with somebody else, and I kind of put it in terms like the people talk about the ages of comic books. They talk about the golden age of comics, which you used to get in the 40s and the 50s, and then you had like the Silver Age and the Bronze Age, and they talk about these different eras of like the history of Marvel and DC comics. And I think that kind of lends itself well to, if you think of Star Trek fiction, because the golden age of Trek fiction was like the James Blish novelizations and the Bantam books. And then the Silver Age was this early pocketbook stuff where, we didn't have an interconnected continuity, but we had a lot of really great writers working for us. And then we had the Bronze Age, which is the kind of post-Avatar lit verse where, thanks to, the guidance of Marco Palmieri and editors who followed after him, we had an interconnected, contiguous universe. And now that's come to a conclusion. What happens next? What are we in next? Is it the Platinum Age, right? What stories are we going to tell from there? I hope this is not the end of my Trek Odyssey, because I love writing Star Trek stories, and I hope I'll get to tell more of them. I feel honored that I've been able to kind of shepherd it to this point at the end of the story, that I've been able to be part of this grand conclusion. And I'm thankful to have the opportunity, and I'm thankful to have a dedicated readership who continue to read the books, because at the end of the day, as a writer, that's what you want. Is you want to be able to tell your stories and have an audience for them. Star Trek enables me to do that in a great and unique way. And I feel very lucky to have had the journey that I've had, and I hope it doesn't end here.
I hope the same thing. I think getting to, do this with Literary Treks and having the opportunity to have, spent time with so many of the authors has been a real joy. It's been so much fun, and I'm obviously thankful that you've continued to write in Star Trek. You've already done a Picard novel, and so I think and I loved that book, and I'm eagerly anticipating what you guys have up your sleeves next. But I'll always be thankful for you, because of course you made me a part of Star Trek by naming an Andorian ship after me, which was pretty phenomenal, and it's actually on my wall.
I didn't blow it up in the book as well, so I could
thank
still
you
be
so
out there
much.
somewhere.
I appreciate that for not destroying my Andorian vessel. But part of, I think, this for me, just in general, has been this part of Star Trek coming to a close, and it's been really emotional, because of the experience of reading the books, but also having the opportunity to get to know the authors in the way that I have. I've been really blessed in that. So just from myself and everybody who's been involved with Literary Treks over the years, I just want to say thank you, because
Right back up.
it's meant the world to us, and I just have always appreciated your time and your willingness to spend time with us to talk about these books and that you've written, and share the behind the scenes of the inner workings of what it means to write these type of stories. But I also want to say that I appreciate your dedication and care for these characters in the stories for the years. Thank
you.
It wouldn't be what it is without all of you involved, not just yourself, obviously. And so I really appreciate that. So before we get out of here, James, as always, where can people find you online? And, is there anything that you do have coming up next that people should be looking for?
I do actually have a new Star Trek project. It's only a small little thing. Just come out this week. The new Star Trek Explorer magazine, which is the rebranding of the official Star Trek publication. It's going to have short fiction in every issue. And I did a short story, just a little 2,000-word short story, which was a lot of fun for me to do. One of the things I've been trying to do in my Trek writing career is I'd like to kind of collect the set and write a story for every kind of incarnation of Star Trek. It's a little difficult because they keep adding new shows and they're kind of moving the goalposts further and further away from me. But I got the opportunity to do an Enterprise story because I'd never had the opportunity to write those characters. So it's a little short story. It's called The Offer. It's got Jonathan Archer and Q in it.
Oh, wow.
And I had a lot of fun doing that. So that's in the new issue 1 of Star Trek Explorer. That's on sale right now. Beyond that, Outside the Final Frontier, I've got my new Mark Dane action thriller novels just come out as well. If people want to find me, same place as always, come to my official website, jswallow.com. That's pretty much a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about me and my books and what's coming out. Or you can come find me at jmswallow on Twitter, where I'm always open to chat about Trek or writing or whatever people are interested in.
Awesome. And of course, you can find me all over the place on social media, MattRushing02. You can also find me here on the network doing the 602 Club, which is our whole other side of the network as we talk about all the fandoms we love. So I hope you will join us there. You can also find the bonus shows there with Snyder Cuts and Assembling Avengers that we're doing. Also doing Warp 5 and The Orb here on the network. Warp 5, of course, about Star Trek Enterprise as we're walking through the entire series to celebrate its 20th anniversary. And, of course, The Orb's about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, did Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, where we finished that show, talked about all of the chapters of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then, of course, doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But as always, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.